warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have quite a full 2 hours ahead of us and a great lineup of panelists, and then also we'll have a presentation just before we end. So thank you all again. I will share my screen for a moment just to share the agenda, or at least the flow of this morning. Here we go. So again, a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us. In a moment, Dr. Asheng Ojwang, our Executive Director at the Global Compact Network South Africa, will do a bit of an introduction and context setting, just talking us through. Then we will go straight into the panel discussion, private sector panel discussion, which will be moderated by Dr. Asheng Ojwang. We have 3 fantastic panelists with us: Eric Leong, the Head of Sustainability at Distell; Labo Nkuku, the Group Digital Technology Program Manager at Aspen Pharmacare; and Marcel Korth, Principal of Living with Dignity, Gender-Based Violence at Anglo American. After that, we will have a presentation by our UN Women colleagues on the Generation Equality Forum and also on the Lusikisiki case study. We will have a little bit of time for questions and answers, depending on how the presentations go, and then we will do a closing and a thank you. So we'll start off with the panel. There won't be any presentations to start off with, so it's going to be a conversation and a discussion. If I can ask, please put your questions into the chat, and we will get to those as we go. But for now, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Asheng Ojwang.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And let me also take the opportunity to thank and welcome all the speakers today, and indeed all the participants. We really are grateful to have you here this morning for this really important conversation. And also we are opening 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. I think there's nothing more important than safety and health and the well-being of everyone. So I will facilitate this session and the panel discussion, and then I'll hand over back to Nicole after that. But I always grab this opportunity to say something small about the Global Compact. Luckily, most of the people in the room are within the Global Compact. That is good. But for a conversation like this one, we always open it up beyond the membership to be as inclusive as possible. And so we also have amongst us guests and people from companies outside of the Global Compact. So the Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability platform. We work with business across the world, and indeed in South Africa, to try and accelerate and scale business impact on the global goals, but also on the foundational principles of the Global Compact. So this is about the business role on human rights, on labor protection, on anti-corruption, and on the more wider range of environmental protections. So the 10 principles is what makes our ESG, environmental, social, and governance framework. The SDGs, or the global goals, is our framework for really understanding and adding value, both to business and to society as large. And within this framework, SDG 5, especially for today on gender equality, quite priority for us. I would also like to say that within the Global Compact and between us and UN Women, and I can see UN Women is there in the room, we 10 years ago co-developed a framework for business called the Women Empowerment Principles. It really outlays the 7 or so different ways that business can help us advance gender equality. So the topic for today on gender-based violence falls squarely on the Women Empowerment Principles. 3 on the safety and well-being of women, children, and other vulnerable groups, and especially the role that business can play. How do you integrate these principles into business practice? So today, once again, of course, marks the beginning of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence up to the 10th of December, which interestingly is the International Day on Human Rights. And so for us, the fight for business to respect human rights and for government to protect human rights, the fight against gender-based violence is a daily business that we engage in. But within these 16 days, we just then take up the opportunity to heighten and increase awareness. And I think that is really important. Just to quickly mention a few statistics that have come out of the UN during this period. Even before COVID-19, 1 in 3 women experienced physical or sexual violence, and mostly by an intimate partner. Emerging data shows an increase in calls to domestic violence helplines in many countries since the outbreak of COVID-19. Survivors have limited information and awareness about available services and limited access to support services. In some countries, resources and efforts have been diverted from violence against women and children in response to immediate COVID-19 relief. And in South Africa, 1 in 5 partnered women has experienced violence by a partner. And the prevalence of physical violence was greater among less educated women than those with secondary education. So just, to set that context and to say that it's really a global war on women, and for us, definitely then against gender-based violence. And so I think until recently, it wasn't very clear what the role of business was. So today we will hear practical ways and insights from this great group of companies with us in the room to really learn from them, to hear from them on how they have understood this, how they are integrating the fight into business practice and the outcomes that they expect from this, what frameworks they're using, and really what their experiences have been to date. The good thing is that at the end of this discussion, of this panel discussion, we will ask each business speaker to put out a call to action to the rest of business. I think it's always more effective for business to drive this within business itself. And so Nicole has already introduced the panel. We will take, and Nicole helped me to keep the time. But we will, I will put a set of questions to the 3 panelists, and I will start with Leong, with Eric, Head of Sustainability at Distell, to just, introduce yourself. Just take the next 2 to 3 minutes. I will come back to you over and over. So let's not take too long within the introduction period. To just introduce yourself, Eric, a little more, your company, and why the issue of gender-based violence is important. Over to you, Eric.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you to all the team at the UN Global Compact, Nicole, Dr. Cheng, and everybody else here today. My name is Eric Leong. I'm the Group Head of Sustainability at Distell. Distell is an alcoholic beverage manufacturer. And this topic is very dear to our passion at Distell, because we understand how rife the problem is in South Africa based on what our president has told us. And we also fully understand that it is a complex problem that all people have to work together, that we can't solve it alone. And I'll unpack that a little bit later, Dr. Cheng. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and you've kept it within time. I will now move to Lavon, Nkuku, Group Digital Technology Program Manager at Aspen Pharmacare. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and why this is important for Aspen.
Hello, how's it, everyone? And thank you for this opportunity to come here. I was actually quite grateful when I was told and picked in the company to really it was almost like a straw for draw, really, to pick anyone in the organization that could represent us here. I actually am the chairperson of the Employment Equity Committee. I'm a staff member as well. So I was excited because as a staff member, I'm a recipient of all of these policies that are put together by functional areas that focus on this. So in other words, the sustainability functions, as well as the HR functions that their day-to-day lives focus on this. For us as the staff members to actually have an experience that is an environment that's nurturing, irrespective of where we come from. So for me being here, feel excited because I'm going to be talking from a perspective of a staff member that's receiving these policies.
That is really amazing. When we do this work with business, we always say sustainability should not be sitting in one corner of the company, but anyone from within the company should be able to articulate and to understand their role as well. So that's really, really amazing. Thank you very much, Labo. I now move to Mr. Marcel Korth, the Principal, Living with Dignity, Gender-Based Violence at Anglo American. Over to you, Marcel.
You are on mute,
Marcel. You're on mute.
I thought I had clicked it, but clearly we're still learning. Thank you, Atieng, and thank you for having me here today. And I'm really glad to share this platform with my colleagues. Unlike Labo, my input is from someone who carries forward the work around GBV that my fantastic colleagues have put in place and have paved the way for over the last couple of years. I'm mentioning a couple of years because these changes are really, quite a journey. And on this call, we probably have people who are at various stages of this journey. So just to make everyone aware and give you comfort if you feel the journey is taking a little bit too long. So my input will be speaking about both what we do internally in terms of our staff and our contractors, but also particularly because we are mining, but also because I want to encourage really every business in every sector to see what actually can happen around us. What kind of duty of care, if you like, can we take on in the communities in which we operate. So my input will be both stretching across those. I'm looking forward to discussing them with you. Thanks for
Thank you very much, Marcel. That is great. Eric, I'm now back to you with a few questions, and I'll start just with the first one. And you come from Distell, which is a large South African alcohol and beverage producing company. What is the company's role in GBV protection and prevention?
Thank you, Dr. Acheng. Firstly, I would like to echo that I represent the voice of our ExCo, our leadership, our wonderful corporate affairs team, and our employee at Distell that we refer as brand crafters, who's pledged to work on this crisis. So if you ask, what is our role? So first, we listen to our president. It is a crisis that is tearing society apart. It is a crisis that's affecting every community in our country and touches the lives of most families in one way or another. It is an injury to our shared humanity. So at Distell, for us, it's a vision to be part of the solution, and we'll stand up against gender-based violence and femicide. So we believe it's time for the Distell men and women to take a stand and to take a stance and support women and victims and in society against gender-based violence. I was referring to the challenge of a wicked problem. You know, we talk about the wicked problem. It's essentially a problem so intertwined, so interconnected that you can't actually, one single entity can't solve it together. That's why we really believe that as Distell, we're opening up and collaborating, and I'll talk a little bit later how we collaborate from an employee perspective, leadership, using our procurement arm and our impact in our value chain with civil society, municipality, government, and agencies to make this kind of transformative partnership. Because I think somebody described it to me, if I may share, is like, sometimes feel it's a problem that only happens somewhere else. It's not in my community. It's not at my head office. It's not in my suburb, you know, it's not at my church, but the reality, it's happening right there like you describe it. So somebody said to me, if you could picture 4 people in a boat, 2 on one end and 2 on the other end, and there's a hole in a boat, and the 2 on one on the where the hole is are busy trying to plug the hole that's flooding the boat and taking all the water out. And then the other 2 just stare at the one that's working very hard and just say to themselves, aren't we so lucky we're on the right side of the boat? But little do they realize we're all in that same boat and we have to work together, right? So for us at Distell, we work with the SDGs, as you may know, and this, you've alluded to it, touches 2 SDGs that are primary for us, which is SDG 3, well-being, and 8 is about decent working condition. And I think we'll talk a little bit about the gender pay gap and the inequality. And the 2 foundational SDGs for us is SDG 17 and 5. 17, because we realize that we can't do it alone. We have to work as partners in that ecosystem. And 5, which is about this gender inequality that we have to do an impact about it. So when we look at this problem, it's actually talked to what you also mentioned. It's at the core, at the heartbeat of our organization, which is our human rights policy. So our human rights policy, we have 10 principles, and I will just mention 2 of them that's very much the topic of today, which is principle 1 at Distell, which is no harassment and discrimination, and principle 10 about community engagement. So what happens is once we have all this awareness campaign on our human rights policy, that impacts our employee code of conduct, our business code of conduct, and our responsible sourcing policy that works in that whole ecosystem. So in short, to answer your question, we recognize that there's a call for action from our president. We recognize that it's a wicked problem that we all have to work together. It's not one entity that can work solution. We recognize that our people, our brain crafters, wear many hats, their mothers, fathers, leaders, employees, community, involving clubs and communities. So they're all that hat, it touches all of them. And we recognize that our backbone of the SDGs and human rights is creating that framework and our vision to be part of that solution. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. We will come back to the nitty-gritties of yes, how you really actually make this practical. But let me go to Labo quickly. Aspen has its own 16 Days of Activism campaign. Tell us about the campaign and what it entails, Labo. You have to unmute.
I just realized that I'm on mute. I think we all should be quite versed on this muting and unmuting situation by now. So from an Aspen perspective, and myself as a staff member, and having to partake in this 16 Days of Activism, it's always such an exciting campaign within Aspen, because there's lots that we do, because we take this quite seriously. You know, the mere fact that we are a signatory to the UN Women Empowerment Principles is just a show of commitment of our board and as well as our executive teams in terms with respect to not just the holistic environment in the workplace, but also the 16 days of activism. I want to read a quote because I think it will kind of explain some of the initiatives that we're doing. We're currently running the 16 Days of Activism, starting the campaign prior to the 25th. So it starts with preparations and collating people's views and perceptions and feelings with respect to the 16 Days of Activism. This is coming from one of our CEOs. So we started the campaign already. So our campaign starts before the 25 days. I want to read what he said. His name is Sama Kasim. He's the CEO of Aspen Global Incorporated. He says, I dream of a world where my daughters grow up with no human intentionally inflicting pain on another human. I condemn all forms of violence, psychological, physical, sexual, economic, etc., regardless of gender, race, religion, and any other criteria that people use to segregate. I salute our Aspen colleagues who are running the 16 Days Activism campaign, as this reminds us of all of us that we have a role in creating awareness and role modeling peaceful unity. And this just resonates with everyone in the organization, calling out not just a call to action from an executive and board member perspective, but a call to action for all of staff members. There's a whole lot going on, wearing of orange, for example, as part of this campaign. As you guys may know, it's actually the Orange Day today, so hopefully a lot of people are wearing orange. My earrings have a little bit of orange today. We've also got communications campaigns that go around during the entire 16 Days of Activism. We do distribute policy reminders. We have an anti-harassment policy, which has been extended to include anti-bullying and cyberbullying, just attending to some of those psychological and other violence issues that come through that sometimes employees don't talk about because they're possibly too embarrassed or they don't feel the environment is safe enough. And for us, it's quite important to create a safe environment for all employees to reach out should they have a challenge, not just within the workplace, but outside of the workplace. Because what normally happens is that if there's abuse happening at home, some of the staff members might feel like they're too embarrassed and they don't come to work to hide the abuse at home, and it creates absenteeism, which obviously has an impact on the business. So as business, we recognize that we cannot be silent. We have to be quite vocal, assertive in passing on the message of 16 Days of Activism. There's other things, I don't know if I have enough time to talk about all the other activities happening during the 16 days. We've also got Professor Cornette Davis from the University of Johannesburg coming next week to have a lunch with us. She's done an incredible, significant work in the gender-based violence and a lot of surveying of different groups, and coming to unpack some of the responses and the analysis that came through from there, and highlighting just how much of a priority this needs to be for business. So there's a lot more, but I'm not sure if I have enough time today to cover. We might be here for a long time.
Thank you, Labo. And I think the one important thing, especially from a company, is that voice, the intention must come from the top. And so what your global CEO is doing is commendable, because every company response to some of these challenges we have must be driven from the top. The intention of the company must be absolutely clear. So I think you're starting from, Aspen is starting from a good place. And of course, I'll come back to you to really understand more of this work that you are doing. Let me now move to Marcel at Anglo American. And most of us are aware that Anglo American has this commitment to reimagining mining to improve people's lives. That is really the public intention that Anglo American has put out there, I think, for maybe going to 3 years now. Marcel, how is the company living this statement when it comes to gender-based violence?
Thank you, Achieng. Just before I answer, it so happens that my neighbors are starting major renovations today. So if you hear any building happening, then it's them taking off their roof. As I'm answering your question, I think what you've just said in response to Labo's inputs is really the journey that I mentioned early on that we've been on, starting all the way from our global CEO, who is very outspoken continuously on our zero tolerance stance, and has really driven through the group globally our approach to sexual harassment and gender-based violence. Here in South Africa, we have 3 independent business units, and there again, the executives have really shown amazing leadership, including dialogues around masculinity, gender norms, repeated and continuous discussions. So why I'm mentioning all of that is because that kind of lays the foundation and creates the culture within which each one of us can make a difference and within each one of us can act. But it also builds a system that we can all trust, and that we actually have confidence in, that if we were to report something, whether that's domestic or at the workplace, that it actually is taken seriously and taken forward. So that's just what came to mind as you were speaking about the executive support. We definitely have that experience that it's made a significant shift. It's brought about a significant shift across the group, which, with about 90,000 employees and just over 80% of those being men, and it's not a small fish. So your question was around our purpose, reimagining mining to improve people's lives, and what we actually do about it as far as gender-based violence is concerned. First of all, our work is entrenched in what we call the Sustainable Mining Plan, which in turn is aligned to the SDGs. And within that, we have 3 pillars. And some of the work in gender-based violence, as I've already mentioned, is more internally focused, and some of it is externally focused. But if we think of our employees, we really want everyone to come to work knowing that this is a safe environment, and where I am being violated, harassed, victimized, that I know there are channels for me to report, and I will be listened to, and I will be taken seriously. So that's really where we are at in South Africa at the moment. Globally, we've launched a domestic violence policy earlier this year, which caters for both our employees and contractors, and makes broad provisions for people who suffer from domestic violence. In turn, what we've done is we've done training around the globe for risk assessors. So should I approach you, Labo, and say, this is what I'm experiencing at home, you have a protocol at hand that actually guides you in identifying what's the risk that I'm being exposed to. But similarly, it could be that I don't come to you to report, but you suspect. So there's processes as well in terms of how we can cater for cases like that. Closer to home in South Africa, we are just reviewing our policies around sexual harassment and victimization and bullying. And the purpose there is really to align them to the convention, to the ILO Convention 190. And in Q1 next year, we are launching a dedicated office for the investigation of such cases. And maybe the last point I just want to make, and I'll speak about our community-facing work a little bit later, but the last point I just want to make is also around prevention, right? Much of what we talk about when we speak about gender-based violence is about how we respond to it, and the processes and structures we put in place. But if we really want to make sustainable and long-lasting change, then it's also about how do we actually prevent these from happening? So what we want to engage more in, and that we've certainly started, is to talk about the norms and behaviors that actually lead to violence, and to speak about what role we can play as individuals, as leaders within the company, as members of our communities. So to actually start the somewhat more difficult conversations, because if we offer services to survivors of gender-based violence, it's somewhat easier, and there's never a question, let me put it that way, that's a good thing to do. But if we really want to challenge the norms and behaviors that we all bring to work and take home, and take with us to the bus or the taxi, then that's a much harder job. But it's also, the one that is more likely to bring sustainable change.
Thank you, Marcel. And I'm glad that you are bringing in the dimension of norms and societal practices and cultures. You talked about masculinities, and these are the aspects that we don't always hear within business, because we want to just solve the problem and run with it without really deeply acknowledging that there are certain structural and societal norms that enables gender-based violence to happen. So I think the moment we begin to really probe some of these norms and how we begin to tackle them is an important conversation, even at the workplace.
And Atieng, sorry to come in there.
Yeah.
It's also a conversation that's for everyone, right? Because
absolutely.
We may think, well, those of us who are women on this call may think this isn't for me, but maybe you're raising boys, and then it matters, right? Maybe you're raising girls, a certain set of beliefs and stereotypes, if you like, and then that matters. But also, you know, these kind of conversations and this kind of dialogue, that's what we would ultimately want, again, is also driven through our executives. So it comes from, you know, from two angles, which has, we believe in our case, really worked very well. Sorry to jump in there again.
No, thank you. Thank you. I think that's really insightful for us today. I always say that sometimes at the workplace, we feel uncomfortable to rely on feminist theories. That is really the historical work that has enabled us to be where we are today. Because if you look at that history and the theoretical framework that has been put out there, some of the questions have been answered there. Some of the foundational work that must happen has already started happening. So how do we then use this incredible knowledge to strengthen the business fight against gender-based violence? So thank you for that. I will now go back to Eric. And Eric Distell also has a campaign, an internal campaign called NEON. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, which calls on the men in the company to take a pledge. What is this pledge? How does it work?
Thank you, Dr. Cheng. So NEON, it's an acronym that stands for Never in Our Name, essentially not on your watch. So basically asking the men to take a stance. So it's a very simple step. So it works on 5 key steps. So firstly, it's about understanding, support. Secondly, thirdly, action. 4th, participate. And 5th, living the pledge. So I'll just go through the steps. First is about, I think what we're all saying is we need to improve the understanding on gender-based violence and support all those who's been impacted. And it's neither a woman issue or man issue, but a societal issue at large. Create that understanding ecosystem. So that's the first step, that the pledge encourage everybody who signed the pledge, and we provide all the support. The second step is basically a pledge that you will support women or men to end the cycle of abusive relationship, and that you will encourage narratives that demonstrate equality and respect. So that creating that ecosystem. And third is, as you have an understanding and you're willing to take support, is encourage people to take action against domestic violence by not remaining silent. Saying that I will stand up for those around me who are victims of abuse. That's the stance that the third step calls for. The 4th step is a pledge to purposefully participate in building a gender equal organization at Distell, positively impacting the societies and communities in which we operate, and thereby crafting a better future for all, which is part of our purpose. And 5th is to live the pledge, is I'm joining with others to end violence in my workplace and community. So once they commit to that, and we give them all the support in terms of, which I'll talk a little bit later, in terms of how to offer support to victims and to create awareness and impact in society, and to share the contact details of this organization, etc. And essentially, it's been led through webinars, internal conversation at HR sites, through our EXCO, and all our leadership team educating about that pledge. We've got a website, www.neon.co.za. You can simply go there, making sure you're trained on all these 5 steps, and then you sign the pledge and you submit your details, and you basically go on that journey to leave that pledge. And for all those who don't have internet access at Distell, they can sign their name on the pledge card and forward it to the HR manager, and then basically collect that information, create that right conversation. So that's NEON, Never in Our Name. Thank you.
NEON, that's amazing, Eric. I think about time that we shift the responsibilities to men.
Yes.
And precisely because if you look at the statistics, gender-based violence, victims are more often women. I'm not saying there are no male victims, but victims are more often women and children, and violence perpetrated by men. So as women, we can be told to be as safe, and we've tried all manner of tactics to be safe, but the violence still is not abated. So very important that we also capacitate, or men capacitate themselves to be able to understand and help in the fight against gender-based violence. So that's really, I think, a great approach. Labo, I'm coming back to you because you have a lot to say. And Aspen, talking of Aspen has positioned itself in the community as an organization that cares. How are you achieving this practically? I think we need to see movement.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're saying practically, because that's the gist of all of this, is that we can have so many policies and strategies, and we can have support systems. We can have call center lines where staff members or people in the community can phone in, which we do have all of those things for various forms of discrimination or actions or behaviors that we've seen in the organization, and support systems and structures that we've got in place. But we can have all of that. But if the only proof that you can have that it's actually working is through the feedback from the actual recipients of all of this initiatives. And I want to read a quotation, and that's one of the reasons why I want to read another quotation that's floating around for 16 Days of Activism, is just to show you that those lived principles, processes, procedures that we've got, and call center environments everywhere else, they need to be lived. So we've got Aisha, our group head here, talent management. So one of the employees in talent management, and she says, have you ever felt so scared to close your eyes to sleep, in the fear that you will not see the morning light? Have you been emotionally and physically tormented? Making it through the day without breaking was an achievement. Well, you are not alone. I have felt the fear and been subject to gender-based violence. We have to normalize the dialogue around the second pandemic, which our president did call it, and be there for each other as team members, as colleagues, as human beings. Stop violence by being a supporter of those around you who are suffering. This, for me, it's not the only quotes. There's a couple of others where people are being vulnerable because the place, the environment we're in at Aspen is such a safe space that those policies are not just collecting dust everywhere, but they're actually being lived experiences where people actually support each other. And when it extends to the communities, there's a couple of programs that we have, but I want to start by our strategy, which is also on our board packs. So if you go into the integrated report for Aspen, you will find that our board members have also committed to a socioeconomic development strategy. And it talks to this holistic approach of sustainability, because when we're talking about sustainability, you know, sometimes people are thinking just only about saving the ozone layer and many other issues, and they don't want to tackle the human side of things, where it's a real issues that need practical approaches and actions. And so in our commitment on the socio-economic development, we're very practical about how we're going to function as an organization in order to not work in isolation, but to work with our communities. We start internally. So internally, we have partnerships between the senior leadership teams and the staff members through different forums. We have the Employment Equity Committee, which I'm a part of. We also have the Aspen Women's Forum, which also talks to this. They focus mainly on these particular issues, looking at fair pay, gender principles, and looking at competence and development of not just women and men, but aspiring leaders as well, looking at diversity and finding innovative ways through these partnerships with staff to have better priorities, better business priorities, and not just compliance, because we can't just only be compliant. We have to have these priorities adopted by all in the organization, and that extends to other programs that we have outside of the organization, which talk to things like putting up clinics. We've got a couple of clinics that we've refurbished and basically trained nurses, etc., to reach out to the communities. As you know, we are a pharmaceutical company, so for us, health and well-being of our community is quite important to us. And I don't want to name all of the different different pharmacies and clinics that we have put in place, mobile clinics as well. But that is just an example of how we're reaching out to the communities, because we understand that if the community is suffering, we too as a business are going to suffer.
Absolutely. You bring in really other dimensions that are important, and also, showing that it is not a single fight. There are certain other enablers that you must push in order to move to success within the company. So you're having the board oversight, and you're feeding, the board, and hopefully they're also monitoring how the company is doing as you really implement within the company. But I think also quite importantly, the reach to communities. I'm also noting that you saying there are interconnections to even other equality areas, like how do we pay our employees? How are we dealing with the gender pay gap? If you listen to the statistics I said earlier, often women who are economically have less income or have less education tend to, in more disproportionate numbers, experience gender-based violence. So there's an empowerment, there's an economic empowerment aspect of it, even as much as we are talking about the cultural norms that enables gender-based violence to happen. So I'm back to you, Marcel. I hope you're still with us. Please talk us through Anglo-Americans' evidence-driven interventions. Just also, moving to those practical things that Anglo-America is doing.
Thank you. So here I just want to speak a little bit about what I mentioned earlier on, the work that's more externally focusing. So we speak about outside the gate, where we start moving into communities. And we have existing work through our, what we call the Thriving Communities portfolio and our sustainable mining plan, that, let me just switch this off. In health, education, and livelihood. So there's existing work that happens in our mining communities in these areas. So for instance, in response to COVID, we've employed, through a partnership with the University of Pretoria, just under 40 clinical associates. Those are community healthcare workers that were initially employed to move from household to household to educate about COVID-19, but seeing that they are there, we've since expanded their mandate. And one of the things, for instance, they do is they look out for signs of domestic violence as they visit households. But we'll expand their mandate over the coming months to go beyond that and move broader into gender-based violence. But as you ask about evidence, there's really two sets of evidence that informs our work in that space. And that is, first of all, we've conducted baseline assessments in some of our operations, both within the company, but also in our communities, to gain a better understanding of what does gender-based violence actually look like here? What are the dynamics? What are the characteristics? So not so much about the quantitative assessment and trying to see how big the problem is, but more a qualitative assessment to see, you know, what are actually the issues, so that we have a better idea of what we need to address and how we can address them. The second set of evidence comes from international global evidence on what works and what doesn't work in gender-based violence response and prevention work. And as we now develop this is now informing our way forward, and our way forward at the moment is that we are just contracting a consortium of organizations in South Africa who are helping us to develop a gender transformative curriculum, which means that everybody who undergoes this program should be challenged in their own beliefs, assumptions, and norms. And the first group of people that we want to work with is our implementing partners in community. So anybody who acts on our behalf, be that working with schools. We work in South Africa with 109 schools and about the same number of early childhood development centers, or health, the clinical associates that I've already mentioned, or any of our socioeconomic and livelihoods initiatives. So the idea really is that anybody acting on our behalf would have undergone a process of a personal journey, if you like, which will challenge their own gender norms and hopefully make them a little bit more conscious, and ultimately, you know, stop people from, you know, enacting the gender norms that we've all grown up with. But also be easier pick up signs of violence. So if I work with a young woman or a young man over a period of 6 or 9 months, like our livelihoods initiatives would, and I meet them once a week or every day for that matter, what are the kind of signs that I need to look out for that could give me an indication, and how do I actually respond to that? And when we then come to response, with our health team, we are developing what we at the moment call pathways to care. What happens if I come and report to you? How do you even know where to send me to? And how do we know that where you want to send me actually has the services available that are written, you know, on their pamphlet or on their website? And the third one is, we obviously don't want anyone that acts on our behalf to perpetrate any acts of violence. So that's a third one. So when we say this is evidence-driven, then we really want, so one piece of evidence, for instance, is that the global evidence with the focus on the global South has shown us is that the facilitation of these processes really matters, so that we don't have a process that is about information and knowledge only, but it is a process where I know these things, but I can also experience them and feel them, because it's our belief that, you know, these, if I just know, the example often given is smoking, right? So if I just know that smoking is bad for my health, that isn't enough for me to stop smoking. And similarly, if I just know that I shouldn't act on certain norms or stereotypes or, you know, kind of instincts that I have, my learned behavior from childhood or wherever, that isn't enough. I need to be given space to actually practice this. And I need to be given space to practice where I also fail, and where I can come back and say, look, I really tried, but it didn't work. So yeah, that's kind of the direction we are going.
Thank you, Marcel. I think partnerships are important. You're bringing in the really critical point of education and curriculum change. Let's begin this way back, because education is an important element of the fight against gender-based violence. And if we really seriously want to challenge these norms, I think it's going to take a shift in mindsets as well. So thank you very much for that. I'm coming to the last set of questions for the three of you. And I'm back to Eric. And after this, then we will do the call to action from the three companies as well. But Eric, Distell has a target to reach 10,000 women through various partnered campaigns. And I'm glad you're talking about partnerships at this point in time. Tell us about these partnerships and campaigns, and what does the business hope to achieve?
Thank you, Dr. Chang. I think before I get to that, so that is our reach, to reach 10,000 women and men through this campaign. And it's what we've done is we have at Distell, 20% of all employees' bonus is linked to the SDGs, and there's 10 measurements that we work so that we can motivate to work as a collective in that transformation partnership, both internally amongst function and externally with the stakeholders, right? So one of those 10 measurements is those 10,000 people reach, but I just want to highlight some of them as well, which talks through economic empowerment. We have targets on Black women-owned procurement, job creation within women, road safety, and all of that as well. So these are very linked in those targets, which is worked part and reported into our Sustainability Council, Social Ethics Committee, and then also goes to internal audit, and a percentage go to external audit, and eventually we publish all of that, right? So now coming to this 10,000 reach, we look at the reach and the type of impact we're doing in terms of that, in terms of the period of change, and how we've aligned that from that target is basically we've worked with the government national strategic plan and the 6 pillars focusing on GBV. So, and the Department of Social Development. So it has 6 pillars. The pillar 1 is very much start with internal. It looking at accountability, coordination, and leadership. So we have a leadership charter, and I've talked about the NEON, never in our name pledge. So that's basically setting the tone of collaboration, and then it goes to the external reach that we're referring to, the 10,000. The pillar 2 is actually driving and preventing and rebuilding social cohesion. So starting that dialogue. So what do? We have tavern dialogues with men in high-risk communities in various provinces to get them to talk about what is the societal issue. We've launched men lounges with the partnership with the Department of Social Development, and also in our value chain. So that's looking more downstream, upstream in our farms. As you know, we are big in orchard and vineyards, using apple and grapes to make ciders and our wine. So both on our farms and our partner farms, there's a lot of psychosocial challenges there in terms of GBV. And basically, how do we help both internally and lead by best practice on those farms and reach there? And already we've reached about 2,000 people in that agri sector, let alone downstream with about 40 tavern dialogues and about another 100 men lounges. That's pillar 2. And then we go to pillar 3. Once you've created that social cohesion and conversation, we talk about justice, safety, and protection. So there we work with giving personal alarms. We've done about 5,000 personal alarms for women in high-risk communities. And then we work with the GBV shelters on the provinces as well. And also looking at maintenance and giving them alarms, and also delivering home alarms for previous victims as well. So they can have all these panic buttons and feeling safe in a high-risk community when women live alone, etc. So that's pillar 3. Now going into pillar 4, we talk about response, care, support, and healing. What we found often in the crisis is when it happens, women run, and they don't have even dignity care packs. They arrive at a shelter. They don't have the basics to basically think for the next 24 hours what's going to happen to them. So from that perspective, we worked on dignity care packs distributed to those GBV shelters in various provinces as well, and work with those community partnership to enforce that networks of creating that support, care, and healing. And then we get to pillar 5, which is about economic empowerment. Economic empowerment because firstly, SDG 5 is a foundational SDG at Distell, and often what you found is not having that economic independence or empowerment. Women or victims of GBV get caught in that cycle, a horrible cycle of abuse. So all our project on our sustainability, social compact, and everything we do from a tavern, from recycling or ESD or SMME empowerment, we monitor the percentage of women participating in those tenders, how much of them are in our sustainability campaigns and our social compact campaigns, and how we're growing that ecosystem for economic empowerment. And lastly, pillar 6 talks about research, information, and management. And there we work with industry bodies and the likes of AWARE and even the UNGC to keep abreast of all the statistics and the stigma attached to this horrible, horrible pandemic. So that's pretty much what we've been doing. There's a lot of our website. It's truly a journey. And I think that the last point that I want to make is I'm sure the challenge that we have is also working with the law enforcement authorities. The stats are really bad. It's like about under 5% of all those victims become, the perpetrators are convicted, if not 3%. So how giving that confidence, and often what happens, this victim has to go back to that ecosystem where the problem persists. So how to give them that confidence that if you have to report somebody, you're not going to be of that 97%, that it doesn't go further. How do we increase that percentage where justice is done? And I think that's where a massive collaboration is to happen in terms of that transformational partnership, giving confidence, providing the right evidence, giving the support throughout that horrible journey to voice out, and making sure that statistics of only 3 to 5% become convicted is something of the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That's really holistic take from Distell, and I'm glad that you know, bringing up the issues of accountability and collaboration, but also the partnerships that enables enforcement. I think is really important, because what we are talking about here, violence is criminal, and so we must talk about the entire spectrum. How do we enforce accountability, and how do you drive that as a company? Which actually takes me to a question coming from the chat. And Labo, this was actually is quite connected to the question I was going to ask you next. So let me actually rather, draw it from the chat itself. I'm looking for it, so give me a second. It's from Namfla. And she says, great conversation. Please share how you are dealing with perpetrators who may be within your organizations. What are some of your key policy principles in this regard. So I need Labo to begin by answering this and then open it up to the rest of the panelists as well. Labo, take it up.
Certainly, and Nomhled, it's quite an important one because it talks to whether any of the policies that we have in place are actually yielding any fruit. Are we getting people actually either locked up or are fired from the organization if their values do not align to the company's values? And certainly our values as Aspen are such that they explicit in all of our documentation, not just in our strategies, but also in our policies and procedures, so that our awareness programs talk to those policies. So if I make an example, just based on the question, one of our commitments is that we completely are against discrimination of any form, harassment, bullying, violence, or any other treatment that is disrespectful to employees and is a subject of or questions the dignity of an employee. And so all of our code of conduct policies, including the anti-harassment policy that I spoke of earlier on, and anti-bullying policies, they all just measured against what the values of the organization stand to be and what the values we want out of our staff members. And if our staff members do not conform to those values, then we have to start a disciplinary process that looks to exit in a much more respectful manner between the two parties. So we're very stern when it comes to attending to such issues, whether it's discrimination, violence, or bullying. We're very stern and we take them seriously. Our website also channels our staff members towards how they can log these issues, and they remain quite confidential. And if some of those issues are issues that need to be taken up by the Employment Equity Committee or by the Aspen Women's Forum or any of the other forums that we have that partner with staff members, we bring that in as well, so that we make sure that it's not just senior leadership that's involved and being measured against this, but we are too, as employees, are responsible for making sure that all of these policies work. It's not just a leadership issue, it's a holistic ecosystem within Aspen. So yes, we definitely take them quite seriously, and we've had people in the past, we never name names, but we've had people that don't align to these values that have had to exit in the past.
Thank you. Marcel or Eric, how do you deal with perpetrators? And the other part to that question is around whistleblowers. What do you have in place to protect whistleblowers? Because we live in a context where we have seen over and over again that they are not always adequately protected, even outside of the company, if we are talking at country level. So Eric or Marcel, please.
Okay, I'll go first. And I think just to build on Labo, I think firstly, a policy needs to be a living document. It doesn't belong to a file. How do you make a policy become alive, both formally and informally? So that's the first system that we have in terms of making sure there's education, awareness, new employee onboarding, our learning management system, education on site, posters on your portal, so that you're well understood. So you can't say, I didn't know, or I didn't know better. So there is no calling for that. The second step is making sure that every system or procedure builds onto those human rights policy, harassment, and our values, etc. So it's not working in isolation, but it builds on what is the bullseye, the ecosystem of the organization, right? So we make sure that it's intertwined whenever we're doing implementing a system with our own Distell and procedure, or even like SADEX or Vita with our farms or our suppliers. It has those principles and those values, or our responsible post-sourcing policy or contract. There's an addendum reminding everybody about it. That's the second step. The third step is pretty much what you're referring is about compliance and zero tolerance, and making sure there is methods of and looking at this transgression, and there is repercussion for this action leading to dismissal, so that it's briefed not only from a head office but from a grassroots level, and then we monitor all of that, and this happens, and then it has to go to basically to dismissal. It is what it is, and essentially, and we house that in our employment equity forum, and then basically escalated through leadership, so that we understand where are the non-compliance issues by side, by function, so that we can understand the challenges, and then we close the gap and put the corrective action plan in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When we work on anti-corruption and the issue of whistleblowers, and I just want to bring this reference in, we've always encouraged companies to have a safe whistleblowing mechanism that protects the whistleblower. I think I could infer the same to the question we are asking around gender-based violence and perpetrators at work, because very often, and we all, I think, employees, we hear of too many cases where the person that reports in many instances has been the same one that gets hounded out of the company. How do we deal with perpetrators? Marcel?
Thank you. There's three things that come to my mind there. The first one is very similar to what you've described, Charles. You know, we have a similar approach and put in place similar systems and processes. So the Sexual Harassment, Bullying and Victimization Office that we are launching in Q1 is exactly for that reason. The approach we take there is that it's survivor-centered. So what that means in terms of safeguarding, here I'm thinking of, you could be a survivor but also be a whistleblower at the same time, because your report essentially is the whistleblowing process. So in our statement of commitment that we've developed together with our unions, we commit to being first and foremost understanding and compassionate to those who experience and report sexual harassment, bullying, or gender-based violence, and who seek our help while seeking a just and fair response. I'm reading here, and the last sentence is, we commit to eliminating the victimization of people who report sexual harassment. And linked to that is that when a matter is reported to us, we do not minimize the person's experience and do not stand ready to judge the situation. Maybe we know the alleged perpetrator, right? And maybe that person is quite nice as far as we know. But our role then is to address the complaint with compassion and pass it on to those who are best placed to deal with it. So our commitment there is that, you know, we receive every complaint, we take it at face value. We first and foremost believe what is being reported to us is a valid complaint, and the investigation of the merits of the case will have to be, you know, done through the relevant processes. So what that means in terms of whistleblowing and reporting is that we take a victim or survivor-centric approach. And the last one is that we do have an anonymous helpline, a global one, called Your Voice. And I believe every employee around the world is familiar with the processes of accessing that. That includes what we call non-connected staff, so people who don't have access to an email. They have access to Your Voice in other ways. And there we have protocols in place that will ensure anonymity of the complainant.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Marcel. I want to read another question from Schlein. And Schlein, I'll go straight to the question. I know you're commanding speakers as well. But she shifts our attention to the issue of reaching small businesses, as they are looked at as the future for job creation. And this means that many young women will work in small businesses in the future. Schlein says, at 17 years old, working in a small business, she was harassed. So she wonders if during my first job, had it been in a big corporate, would I have had the same experience? We do acknowledge that big corporates have better resources to fight gender-based violence. Schlein's question is, what is your thinking around your organization filtering your GBV campaigns through to small businesses beyond your partners to enable a broader change in society? Great questions, Schlein. And over to you, any of you can answer this.
Could I just jump in there quickly?
Sure.
Thank you. First of all, Schlein, I want to say that I'm sorry you've had that experience, and that I hope, and I'm not sure what your age is now, you said you were 17 then, that I hope you found the assistance that you needed, or that you continue to find it. So I'm really sorry for that experience. In terms of, what can we do as large corporates? I was going to say something later on about the commitments we've made as Anglo-American as part of the Generation Equality Forum coalition on GBV. And one of them, as we often hear in GBV, is about partnerships. But I really do believe that we as large corporates have just so much leverage over other corporates within our sector, but also beyond our sector. So if I think of banking, for instance, that exists wherever we go, what kind of duty of care could we assign to the banking sector? What could banking do? Retail, of course, is all over the country. So what I'm saying is I think there's two things. The one is probably at a corporate level, how can we reach out, as we do here, to other corporates within our sector and beyond, and really encourage every one of us to be involved in whichever ways we can. And the other one is to really think about our kind of supply chain and value chain, and see what happens along that path. What role can we play? What kind of conditions can we put in place? We, for instance, have changed our standard contracts documents earlier this year that make it very clear that we have a zero tolerance stance with whoever we collaborate with, whoever signs a contract with us, and that we have leverage over that contractual agreement should there be any cases that where people are found guilty. It's of course a difficult terrain, because who even investigates and who makes the findings and who decides on the responses to that. But I do think we have a responsibility as large corporates, and that doesn't have to be punitive. It can be that, for instance, Charles, all those courses that you've mentioned, that probably small suppliers, or in your case, Shabine's, I don't know what terminology you use, but do people have access to those courses, right? So I think it's again about intention. I think it's about posing the challenge, and you're posing it here, Schlein, so thank you. Posing the challenge to really make us think not just within our four walls, but really think about holistically what influence can we have over those that we work with or those that we don't even work with. And the last point there, we of course work through the Minerals Council within the sector, but also if you're here from a corporate that's a member of the National Business Initiative, or to be honest, the Global Compact, could play a similar role. How can we link people, as we do here, various corporates, to find inspiration, but also to learn from one another, so that we can, also reach the smaller players within the sector and beyond.
Thank you very much, Marcel. Eric, I don't know if you wanted to add something. We are coming close to the almost to the end, but quickly, if you have input on this particular question.
Yes, I just want to briefly build onto what Marcel has said. I think the way we've approached it at Distell is very much, it starts with self and leadership, and then your own ecosystem. And then the next step is looking at your value chain. So we look at the problem from soil to sip, from our farms all the way to our taverns, and impacting that ecosystem through education, awareness, our responsible sourcing policy, and creating that conducive environment to prevent that with SMMEs. And then the third step, looking at our industry, being the beverage, the Consumer Goods Council, the National Business Initiative, and working in that ecosystem. And lastly, at national level, within our geography and the countries we operate. So there is essentially a process to basically start by self and grow out and basically educate where you can be able to make an impact. Thanks. And it's the right thing to do. And we encourage all corporates to do exactly what Marcel and I are saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to pose this to Labo from Faranaz, how do you encourage participation of staff in the campaigns that you've talked about? As a final question before we go back to the call to action. Thank you, Labo.
Yeah, so there's a lot that we do with different forums. So firstly, by ensuring that there's volunteers for attending to different focus areas in the organization, including sustainability and 16 days of activism and anything else that's related to the success of not just the organization, but staff members. So with those forums, it basically means that staff members are not just talking to management, but they're talking directly to other staff members that are represented in these forums. And so it's much easier, we find it's much easier for the rest of the organization to participate when they're talking directly to their peers and not necessarily talking to a senior leader. And obviously those messages, they filter up to the top because those forums are there to represent that voice and to attend to those voices that are coming through from the staff members.
Now that's great. And Labo, before you go, let's just get straight into it. What would be your call or Aspen's call to action to other businesses on gender-based violence?
Sure, there's so much, but I'm gonna focus on just three things. One, the attitude. So there's that attitude that we have in business that says it's not my problem. It's either the government's problem or community's problem, or you know what, the staff member needs to take care of their own problems at home. We don't want to be involved in that. They just need to focus, come to work, focus, deliver. And that attitude is part of the bigger picture problem that we have in business. And if we start with that attitude first, where we say, it's my problem. So whatever my staff members are going through, whatever's happening in the community outside, that's my problem too. So I'm part of the solution. I need to see the solution to the end. I'm not just going to leave the solution halfway. And the other thing is listening. So the second thing is that we have to listen, not just to staff members, but to the community. What are the voices saying? So most of the time, we're so busy working and trying to be productive and making our targets. We don't spend time to listen. And when we listen, that's when we actually know what the problem is. And then we can find innovative ways to solve those problems. And then the other thing is just be human, just apply humanity, please. In all of your decision making as a business, whether you're looking at supply chains and how you can evolve your supply chains, just apply that human element to it. Those are my three.
Thank you, Labo. Extremely powerful. And you're saying to companies, GBV is your problem. You're saying, listen and be human. Extremely powerful. Thank you for that. Eric, what's your call to action to the rest of business?
I think for us is to firstly to be authentic. Is like if you have a document or policy or employee code of conduct, it has to basically do not do a greenwashing to whatever that calls about, making sure that it is something that is happening so that people don't see, oh, only when there's a problem they refer to that document, or when it's always too late. It's basically the stick versus the carrot approach instead of that. So being authentic to that. The second would be about looking at collaboration and partnership, because a lot of that can't happen alone, and to be part of that solution, you really need to collaborate in a larger ecosystem to make it happen. And accordingly, I would say to build trust, so you have a bias for action, because trust doesn't happen that easily. So you need to work on it for that collaboration and partnership, so that you can have a call for action. Then you can actually monitor, reach, and impact, and making sure that you're actually shifting the dial and the change management is happening. Thank you.
That is really great. Eric, be authentic, and this is to the rest of business from Distell. Be authentic, collaborate and partner against gender violence, and build trust as the foundation for action. Thank you very much. Marcel, over to you. Your call to action.
Thank you. Mine doesn't bite so well anymore, because basically it builds or it complements what Labo and Charles have already said. So I just want to circle back to their points briefly. The one is about being authentic. We speak a lot about being sincere, right? So that as you also said, Charles, so that everybody really knows that this isn't something that is lip service or that is pasted on the walls as a commitment or as a statement, but it's something that we need to live. So that's certainly one call that we would support. But the main one that I did want to raise in a slightly different way is yours, Labo, where you started out speaking about attitude, but you then spoke about it's my problem, right? So if we can start there, and if we can accept that you and I and everybody on this call has a role to play, whether that's at home or in the workplace, as a colleague, as a leader. And what does that mean if we say we have a role to play? It doesn't just mean that I can comfort you and support you when you are in a difficult situation. It also means that I need to speak out in those spaces. So if I'm in a very male environment and people make chauvinistic jokes or sexist remarks for that matter, what's my role there to speak out? Because if I can't start there, how likely am I to actually make the big changes? And where are the big changes going to come from if we as individuals are not pulling together to make those big changes? So that's one that I just wanted to add there. But apart from that, I think having intentional gender transformative discussions and dialogue across the business and with other partners. So plant these ideas elsewhere. We've spoken a lot about partnerships. And again, as I've already said, partnerships within the sector and beyond. And the last one really is to really align our policy frameworks around the convention C190, the ILO Convention 190, because that'll give us the right frame within which then to act.
Thank you very much, Marcel, and I'm glad that you're building onto the earlier call. Be sincere, accept that it's your problem, be intentional with the gender transformative discussions, partner and align. I think all really very powerful, and I hope that my colleagues have captured these calls to action, because the value of engaging with us is that the insights might come from a small group of companies, but our intention and role as the Global Compact Network is to ensure that other companies out there are learning from yourselves. So thank you for the leadership. Thank you for being with us this morning. I think it's the end of the year, but this is probably the most powerful conversation I've sat in this year, and we've sat in a lot of conversations. So from my heart, really sincerely, thank you for being with us today. And I want to thank, usually it's women who turn up for this conversation, and that has been our challenge over very many years. It's very difficult to get men to take the platform. So allow me, all feminists in the room, I'm not taking the focus away from women, but allow me today to thank Charles and Eric and Marcel, really specifically for stepping up. It is really important to step up. Labo, you have our support, and thank you for coming through this morning. So with that, I will hand over back to Nicole for the last segment of this discussion. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Dr. A, for excellent moderation there, really bringing out the issues. Thank you so much to Eric, Marcel, and Labo. Thank you for your insights. We do have the next part of the session is a presentation by Masechaba Tekana, as well as Dr. Lesley and Foster, and they will be talking us through the Generation Equality Forum, as well as some of the work they are doing in Lusikisiki. So please stay with us, and I'll hand over to you now, Ms. Chaba, and then there might still be a few minutes of questions after, but we'll stop at about 12. So thank you for those of you that are still with us, and yeah, please stay engaged for the next part of the session. Thanks, Ms. Chaba.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Nicole and Dr. Acheng, for inviting us to be part of this important conversation. My name is Masechaba Tekana, and I am the National Coordinator for Generation Equality Forum with the UN South Africa Multi-Country Office. And with me, I am joined by Dr. Lesley Ann Foster, who will actually elaborate on the Lusikisiki intervention that the GEF Action Coalition has really focused on and is doing. So I'll try to just speed up and just outline broadly what Generation Equality Forum is all about, and then hand over to Dr. Lesley Ann. And I think for me, what is exciting about this dialogue is its emphasis on call to action. We have spoken, we know that, we are all in agreement that we need to do something, but just committing and leaving it at there will not help us to solve the problem. And what I also like, which is what Dr. Acheng has done, was, when we have dialogues like this, it's important to frame them within the existing frameworks that the UN agencies are doing, so that people don't see these campaigns or these interventions in isolation from the bigger picture. So I like the fact that she started by locating this dialogue within the SDGs, and in particular within the SDG 5, but also locating it within the UN Women Empowerment Principles, the 7 empowerment principles that have been co-created by both the UN Women and the UNGC, giving guidance to corporates in terms of how they can advance gender equality, not only in the workplace internally, in the marketplace by supporting women-owned businesses, but in the community by using your corporate social responsibilities to advance gender equality and engage and try to see how we can collectively address the issues, and in particular of gender-based violence. So with that in mind, I would like to locate Generation Equality Forum within those frameworks. Generation Equality Forum is not another initiative that stands out there. Generation Equality Forum is basically a campaign that the UN Women started in 2020, when there was a realization that after 25 years, where the world gathered in Beijing to agree on a blueprint that will advance gender equality and women empowerment, in 2020, most of the member states of UN did a review on how they were performing against those 12 actions that were taken in Beijing, called the Beijing Platform for Action. And they realized that not even one country has achieved gender equality, despite the commitments that were made when the blueprint was created to advance gender equality. And after realizing that, little was done, even though there was progress made over the years, the UN Women take a step back and said, what is it that we need to do differently if we are to achieve the 2030 objective of achieving gender equality? What made things worse in 2020 was the fact that COVID pandemic hit us globally. And we know the impact of COVID on gender-based violence, when during the lockdown, there was a surge in gender-based violence cases. And so it also posed a risk of us losing the gains that we've made over the years in terms of addressing issues of gender discrimination and achieving gender equality. With that, UN Women realized that we have to do things differently, and that led to the convening of Generation Equality Forum to revitalize the unfinished business of Beijing. And Generation Equality Forum is basically a multi-stakeholder global platform that brings together all stakeholders to tackle the issues of gender inequalities. And Marcel emphasized the importance of partnership and of all stakeholders coming together. So Generation Equality Forum provides that platform for multi-stakeholders to come together. And it is also intergenerational in focus, saying that as we come together as stakeholders, youth play a critical role in advancing gender equality. So it is an intergenerational engagement so that the youth can take on the baton and move the agenda forward. It's an intersectional engagement, also realizing that we do not want to leave anyone behind. When we tackle these issues, come up with solutions, we need to ensure that all the voices are on at the table. The LGBTQ plus community needs to be part of the conversation. People living with disability, women and girls living in rural areas. So the focus when we engage under Generation Equality Forum, we bring all the stakeholders looking at using an intersectional lens. But what's important also, it's a core leadership model that says we all have a role to play, and we all are holding solutions to the problems, and we can contribute positively. And we are equal. We all need to come together to tackle these issues. So this is done through action coalitions. At a global level, when Generation Equality Forum was convened, there was a call for stakeholders to form part of the action coalitions. And if you look at the 12 actions contained under the Beijing Platform for Action, when a review was done in 2020, there were 6 that were lagging behind. And those 6 themes are the ones that kind of inform the Generation Equality Forum themes. And those quickly are gender-based violence, economic justice and rights, bodily autonomy, sexual reproductive health and rights, feminist action for climate justice, technology innovation for gender equality, and the 6th one is feminist movements and leadership. But what happened at the global level, they added the 7th one, which is women, peace and security. So those are the 7 key focal points of Generation Equality Forum, of which Dr. Lesley N is a co-leader of gender-based violence. And when I hand over to you, she will elaborate on what the coalition is doing and what they have been able to achieve at this point in time. So I think, let me just wrap up by just saying, at a global level, Generation Equality Forum has been convened, but we are localizing it. We have already started with localization of Generation Equality Forum here in South Africa. So what we have done, we've convened a multi-stakeholder forum, and our call to action from the UN perspective is to invite the private sector and all organizations to be part of Generation Equality Forum as we are localizing. And so the work that has been done at the global level, the action coalitions have generated what they call a global action plan, a global acceleration plan. And this plan contains the actions and the priorities, the tactics and the strategies, together with the targets that have been set, that all stakeholders need to work towards in order to advance gender equality, to accelerate gender equality. And South Africa has committed to be part of Generation Equality Forum, and hence we are localizing, working in collaboration with government and the Department of Women, together with the Department of International Relations and UN Women, providing technical support, are the entities that are leading the localization of Generation Equality Forum. And as I said, we've developed a multi-stakeholder forum. We have localized and we have our action coalitions also based on the themes that I've mentioned. Each action coalition is consisting of multi-stakeholders, and the Gates Foundation provided us with funding that was allocated to the action coalitions in South Africa, and they each identified an activation to create awareness around Generation Equality Forum. And at a later stage, hopefully throughout the year, next year, we will be part of the conversations that are ongoing, facilitated by the UN Global Compact, together with our other partners, where we bring on board more stakeholders and we work collaboratively. So I think with that, I will hand over to Dr. Lesley N to just elaborate on the Generation Equality Forum, Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition work that has been done. And I see my other colleague, Miriam Mangera, is also here, who is part of that Action Coalition. Thank you so much, and over to you, Nicole.
Over to Dr. Lesley N.
Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this very important discussion. it was very good to hear what the corporate sector, private sector is engaging in and how it's engaging in on gender-based violence. My role is to speak about the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, which is part of the UN Gender Equality Forum, and to tell you about the work that we have done thus far. As you know, earlier on in the year, the Minister of Police announced that Lusiki is the rape capital of South Africa. It had reported the highest numbers of rape in the country over a period of time, and there was grave concern as to why this happened. At the same time, we were engaging in the UN Generation Equality Forum as the Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition, and I recognized the need for us to ground and to locate our intervention in that area. It made the most sense to be able to take this global campaign right down to the local and to initiate interventions that could possibly drive down the numbers of rapes in the area. We established a coalition, as Masechaba has said, which included the global family of UN, which was UNICEF and UN Women, etc. The presidency was involved in that, as well as government departments and institutions, but we recognized that the main drivers had to be the local communities themselves. And this was one of the principles that we applied. The main principles of the work were that it would be multi-sectoral, it would be intersectional, we would take a development approach, and that we would include the local communities as the main focus of the intervention. We also were sure that we wanted to take a human rights approach, an equality approach to this work. So in order to ground it at the local level, my organization, which is Masimanyane Women's Rights International, was selected to be the driver in the province because we are located here, because we host a rural women's network called the Women's Equelo Network, but that we were also linked and active within the space of the presidential projects and the UN projects. We did an initial scoping study and found that there was a Lusiki Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Forum that had been established in March this year, also in response to this. And so we partnered with that forum, recognizing the importance of them driving the process because of the political and social capital they had in that area, that it would be a locally rooted initiative, and that really we had to create the space and the opportunity to build whatever capacity was needed in that area. So we, as the forum, the Action Coalition, established a process of engaging the community. We went to the community as a big delegation and then engaged in community consultations. We didn't only speak to people in the town center, but we divided ourselves up and went into the actual villages where we engaged the communities around the conversation as to why there were such high levels of violence against women. It was a profound process because it was so locally focused and because we were giving opportunity for local members to raise the issues, to share with us their lived realities and the experiences they were having. We were able to look at what their challenges were as rural communities, what the gaps in service delivery were. In one village we went to, they hadn't had services in 11 years. So it wasn't just a gap, it was a gaping chasm that we encountered there. And to look at what the issues of inequality were and the issues of gender inequality specifically in those areas. These were very, very important insights for us. We were able then to engage government departments, including the South African Police Services, the NPA, the Department of Transport, Department of Social Development, and so forth, in a dialogue post the consultation about what kind of interventions would be most relevant to the area. So I think it was a very powerful intervention because we were able to identify, all the different challenges like the policy gaps, the resource issues, For instance, there were 316 villages in the area and only 147 policemen. We were able to look at the issues of poverty in the area, the lack of employment, the climate change issues such as drought, etc., which were all impacting on communities. And in some way or another, all the inequality, the deprivation was leading to these high levels of violence and violence against women in particular. So we then regrouped together with all of the stakeholders to look at what kind of interventions were possible. We came up with a list of commitments, an initial list of commitments, which we are now in the process of implementing, building coalitions around all of the areas that we found are necessary to to engage with. I mean, one of those is that the Deputy Minister for Sports, Arts and Culture has committed to engaging chiefs in the area to address the issue of gender inequality and cultural and traditional practices, which are still quite widely experienced there. Our learning is that we need to ground all interventions in gender-based violence in local leadership in a focused and intentional way. That's very important. We don't believe in any kind of helicopter intervention or boutique projects where you go in, do something that looks smart on a particular day, and then leave the community without any kind of sustainable improvement in that community. We've also learned that we cannot be event-driven, this is what I'm just saying, but build consistent, sustainable development programs working with and through local leadership and local communities. In building capacity, both of service providers and the community themselves is critical. The capacity building needs to be a knowledge building, skills development, and awareness raising on a consistent basis so that the communities develop and take ownership of the problem themselves. It was good to hear about the interventions being championed by the private sector. From our experiences and the interventions we've made, we welcome such initiatives, but also want to suggest that to enhance the existing interventions, the private sector should join the ongoing interventions so that it strengthens local, national, and international multi-sectoral partnerships. We need everybody to come on board at the local level to provide that. Our request to the private sector is for very specific support in the interventions we have identified. And some of those include: one, building support for re-establishing community policing forums. There's no community policing forum, and the lack of resources, the lack of capacity within SAPS cannot be addressed on a short-term basis, but community policing forums can provide the support to communities. They have never received any kind of stipend, so there's been no incentive to really continue that work. We want to re-establish those community policing forums and want to suggest that the private sector can help us with that kind of support. The other is for the private sector to provide the Lusiki Gender-Based Violence Forum with financial and technical support, because this is what is much needed at the moment. There are other departments with which they can partner, like the Department of Transport, which made a commitment to provide buses to bring communities into town where they can access services. And maybe a partnership on the issue of transport would be available. We also think that it's important for the private sector to consider economic empowerment programs, because the deprivation, the inequality, the poverty in the Lusiki area is dire. You know, there's over 50% unemployment rates, but it used to be a huge agricultural area. And if we can revitalize thinking around, maybe agricultural development as a form of employment for local communities, but also for food security, that kind of partnership would be very, very important. Partnerships around addressing climate change, the lack of water, the continued drought, are other areas of collaboration that would be important. So we see a partnership in these intervention strategies very important, because it would be significant and make a significant contribution in reducing vulnerability to inequality, and this ultimately will lead to reduced levels of gender-based violence. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Chaba. Thank you, Dr. Foster. I just want to check, are there any questions at this stage? I know we have 2 minutes remaining. Okay. Ms. Chaba and Dr. Foster, I think if you could possibly put your email addresses into the chat, I think that would help. If there's anyone that wants to reach out, they would be able to do so. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And I think what has been reiterated, which has also come out through the private sector panel, was the collective action. I think Erika said many times, this is not something that any business can do alone, but also that any stakeholder can do on its own. So again, the collective action, talking about partnerships, how we partner to make all of this happen, but then also the intersectionality. There's so many different parts and pieces to this puzzle that actually need to come together to make it work. And of course, again, the opportunity for business to get involved in projects, they don't have to recreate, to actually get involved with projects that exist, and to capacity build and support the projects that are running on the ground. So thank you so much for that. Once again, thank you to all of our speakers. I can't believe we are exactly in time. This has really been a fantastic, practical conversation. Thank you to Dr. Ashing Ojwang for moderating and bringing out those questions as well. And thank you all so much. We will continue the conversation. If you don't know, we do this. The Compact Dialogues is our thought leadership series. And so this is only one of many that we have. Please follow us and attend the others, because these are the really important conversations that we bring to this platform. And your voices are then heard and shared, and the learnings are shared with business. So thank you so much. And with that, I close at exactly 12 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.